Hey guys, welcome back. It's Tev Sleeve Clever, and today we're going to be covering how to create this futuristic cyberpunk looking image. And we're going to cover a lot of stuff in Photoshop, including lighting effects, masking effects, composition, all kinds of stuff. So make sure to stay tuned for the whole video because you're going to learn a lot in this one. And if you're wanting to work side by side with me during this, you can go to the website, sign up for the newsletter right here, and you're going to get a link to this page right here. And be sure to bookmark this because it's full of downloads and a lot of articles you can go through, but bookmark this so you can go to it anytime you want. But the download will be right here underneath this one right here. Okay, so that'll be available. Also, the MasterPass members will have it in the resources page. Okay, this can be found on any page. Go to the linear articles or just search resources and you'll see resources right here. It's all over the place, but you can search it here and you're going to find it right here. Okay, so if you're a MasterPass member, just go here and download it along with all these other goodies here. Okay, so that's how you get it. Let's work side by side if you can. So it's basically 10 steps, but every step has kind of like their own little elements within it. So I'm going to break it down as simply as I can, and we're going to just kind of walk through this image, and I'm going to show you exactly what I did. Okay, so let's start with the first step. I'm going to grab my stylus. I got my stylus finally, so maybe I can draw a little bit better. But so let's go to the first step. We're going to go all the way down to the very first image, and this is just basically the raw image. So no retouching or anything like that. The way I did this is, you can see the lighting right here, it's rim lighting with the light on the opposite side of her, so she's in between the camera and the lighting. And then I poured milk down so it would be illuminated, but also had the shutter speed a little bit slower so it would create this motion blur in the milk, but also freeze the motion in the milk as well. And that's kind of the technique we're going to go for. And I'll show you this image right here. This is kind of a funny image. You can see the milk coming down and splashing her. That was pretty fun to do. But yeah, that's that image. A little behind the scenes. But the next step you're going to want to do is just retouch it. So you're going to go in and probably just, I usually, when I retouch stuff, I just use this healing brush and bring it down low, and I'll just go in and you can refine, little areas that need to be refined. But for the most part, this one's pretty good. I did take out some face blemishes and stuff, but that's about it. Let's move on to the next step. This is going to be the cutout. The look we're going for is the motion blur around the face. And since she wasn't moving, there's no motion blur, but I want to create that effect, kind of like the milk here. See, the milk has that ghosting effect. I want to create that effect as well on her face. And that's partly inspired by Elizaveta Porodina, and I've got some examples of her work here. So you can see it's also pretty similar to Paolo Roversi. I've got a video on him, I'll link, but they use this motion blur, and it's easier to capture it in camera, and it's more authentic if you capture it in camera rather than recreating it like we are. But this one looks like it was recreated. You can see how she's using lighting effects. She's got a specific style. She's got the blank backdrop, female models, high fashion, lighting effects, motion blur, looking away from the camera. She also goes in, and this model's skin looks like it's got oil on it or something, but she also goes in and dodges and burns these areas so it looks more highlighted and darker in certain areas. So I'll show you that. This one is definitely caught in camera. It's a really good example of it. Let me show you some lighting effects that I captured during a concert for this guy, Mimosa. He's an electronic artist. So I used an on-camera flash. That flash had a red gel on it, so that's why we're getting these red people here. Everybody's colored red. And then it had a light modifier on it called the Gary Fong light modifier. It looks like a big toilet plunger, but it works really well. So I had that pointed up towards the ceiling, and then the modifier kind of softened everything just a little bit more. And then what you do is you need ambient light in the room. You set your shutter speed first, and you're going to put it on shutter priority, so you can just dial in the shutter speed and take a photo and see what the photo looks like after you take the image. And you're going to want a little bit of motion blur, kind of like here we've got motion blur going on right here. So you're going to look for these motion blur effects in the lighting, and then the on-camera flash is going to freeze the people. See? So we got motion blur with frozen images too. So in shutter priority mode, you're going to dial in this motion blur that you want. How much? A lot or a little? Okay, and then you're going to be able to determine which aperture you can use. So then you can go into manual mode and just keep it consistent throughout the night. But that's how I would do it. There's several different ways you can do things, but that's how I would dial it in. So you hit the shutter button, the flash is going to pop and freeze everything, and then you're going to move your camera around to create these ghosting effects. So it's like press the shutter, pop, everything's frozen, and then you move your camera around just a little bit. Just depends on how long your shutter speed stays open, but that's how you do it. That's kind of like the gist of creating the ghosting effect. So I've got a whole folder full of lighting effects that you guys can download. I'm going to have everything ready for you. This is all JPEGs, and then I've got the camera raw, you know, if you want to dial in some settings or anything like that. These are all from the road, so you're going to see some water droplets, and I'll show you how those come into play if you want to use those too, but I didn't use them in the final image, but you can if you want. And then I also have a video if you want to go through those, so you can watch this video. This is just lighting effects, okay, and you can go through and take screenshots. This is all the lighting effects, so you can pause it and use the screenshot of the lighting effect that appeals to you. But I also have all these that I kind of liked that you can use as well. Okay, I'll show you how to use those too. So back into the image. So this is kind of inspired by Eliza Vita Porodina, and what we want to do first is cut this out. So we need this face cut out from the background, and probably one of the easiest ways to do that is the pen tool. And if you're not familiar with the pen tool, just go down here and use the curvature pen tool, and this is a lot easier than using the normal, you know, standard pen. So you basically just click every so often, just depends on the curvature of the form, and it's going to automatically curve for you, so you don't have to mess around with the handles or anything like that, and you just kind of like dot to dot the whole profile of the model. Okay, so I'm just clicking, I'm not doing anything else, I'm just clicking. This one, if it messes up like that, just undo and click again. And like, see how this creates a V in the lips? You want to just make sure you have a point right in that crevice there, and then come up, so it's going to be a nice sharp point like it is there, just like this in the nose. You can refine these later with the Alt and Option keys, but I'm just clicking here for now, get the basic outline of the profile, and then you can go and refine it. Okay, so that's done. I'm going to go around here and finish that. Click here, then you can go back in where like the nose is, and you hold Alt. See, you'll see a little carrot looking shape like an upside down V, and you can go in and refine these by dragging or just clicking. You just keep moving this around to refine the shape. You can use any of these pen tools right here, but the Option or Alt key is the shortcut. So this looks good enough. So then you go in and you can go to paths, and then you just create a marquee here. It's gonna select it and make sure you're on your layer. So we want the retouched one. You can do this many different ways, but I'm just gonna press Command J. So I've got the profile there, and we can see it on the black background. There's the profile. Okay, pretty good, pretty clean. You can go in and press Command or Control and then click on the image, and you can modify this edge. You can feather it if you want. You can inverse it. Command or Control plus Shift plus I will inverse it. You can also go up here and just say inverse right here. But anyway, you can refine it if you want. This isn't like a detailed video on how to cut out an image, but these are just tips. You can also do this. You can go here, use the threshold, and do it this way. Select mostly blacks here. This will help you capture these droplets, and that's what I did to capture the droplets. So I wanted these droplets, but you can do it both ways. You can capture the droplets with this technique and then capture the profile with the other pen tool technique. So Command Option Shift or Control Alt Shift plus E will merge all the layers, so we get this. Okay, that's all we're getting. Okay, so now we have mainly that selected, and I'm gonna go up here, select color range. I'm just gonna select the whites, and then I can go back on my image, turn this off, and then I'm going to push Command J, and that's going to give us this. Okay, then when we add that to the profile, we've got pretty much the droplets and the profile as we need it. So I did this method, but I went in and I feathered the edges here, softened those up, and then I cut this out just with the lasso tool. Cut all this stuff out because it's just creating noise, and then pushed Command or Control X and it'll delete it off there. But anyway, that's basically the cutout. That's probably the most difficult part, so I wanted to try and just show you some tips on how to do it. So we've got the cutout, and I'm going to use the one that I made. This is the one you can use too. Okay, I kind of refined it. Okay, so now we have that. Now I've created a black background, and we've got our face cut out. So this is the main face with the milk droplets. What we want to do is dodge and burn the cheekbones. So just duplicate this layer, Command J or Control J. That's going to duplicate it. You're going to have this, okay? And then you go over here, and this is the dodge and burn tool. You're going to dodge it. Dodge means lighten it up, and you can reduce the exposure to maybe 50 or even 30. Just push 3 or 5. It's going to change the percentage up here. So, and then you just brush it in. Wherever there's highlights already on her face, you just accentuate those highlights. So like this right here, probably 30 or 20 is going to be enough for this percentage. You just go in and highlight some of these areas. If you want to, like, say if this area is too dark, you just add a little bit more light in that area. Just depends on what you want. But the way Eliza Vita Perodina makes it, she highlights these cheekbones a lot. Okay, so I'm just brushing that in. And then, like, the forehead's good enough. Some on the eyelash, some on the eyelids. Okay, just a little bit. Okay, so that's after, and this is before. Okay, don't want to go overboard. I think I might have gone overboard, but that's just an example. This is the one I created for myself. That's in the files that you'll download. So it's a little bit more subtle. This one's more harsh. Just depends on what you want. So I'm going to delete that since I don't need it. I already have it. Okay, so we've got the dodge and burn created. Now we want to kind of create that motion blur effect. And how we do that is we duplicate the main face. Okay, so duplicate this main face here. So first we're going to want to blur this. Just go to Gaussian blur. Maybe blur it just a little like that. 17 pixels. And then we're going to go to radial blur, and we're going to set this little radial dial here to the right side where her face is, so the blur radiates out from this point. You can set the amount to 10, maybe 15, just depends on what you want, how far you want the blur to go. Okay, so we've got that. And then we want to add a lens blur. And that looks fine. Usually just adjust this till you get what you want, but we just want a little more blur. Okay, and then this blurred image is going to go below. That way it kind of creates that motion blur effect around her face. Okay, and then we're going to select that blurred image. Just use the push V. You'll go to this selection tool here, and you're going to move this out just a little bit. And you can use the liquify filter, liquify. You can use liquify too if you want to create more like motion blur effects, like it's dragging out. Okay, but I didn't use that in the final image, but it's just another option. So you move it out, and then that's kind of like the lower layer for the motion blur. So this is the final result that I had, and it looks like I had the radial going from more from like the nose, okay, in the final, but it just depends on what you want. So like the radial positioning was more towards the nose, radial blur, so maybe like more right here. Yeah, there you go. Just below. See how it's pointing outward? So you just play around with it till you get what you want. All these settings are just like so much you can do with this program. So this is the final one. So I lowered the vibrance. Just go up here and just add a vibrance layer adjustment. And I lowered the vibrance to, let's see, -100. So that's almost black and white. And throw this away. And then I clipped it. So I hold Option or Alt, and it clips just that image below it. So you can just hit Option or Alt. You're going to see an arrow, and it's going to clip just the image below it. So I did that. And then I added some hue and saturation. So I desaturated and I added some saturation. So you go up here and you add this hue saturation layer adjustment, and I made it +5 and then +84. So it's going to tint it just a little bit. See the orange color, it tinted it. You can go blue or whatever, but I just want it kind of like a similar color as her face, but just more saturated. So I went with that. Okay, so we've got all of our layers so far. We've got the blurred, we desaturated it, then we added saturation back. We've got the main face, then we added the dodge and burn. Okay, moving right along. So then you're going to duplicate this blurred layer, bring it above the dodge and burn layer. And what we're going to do is try and create lighting effects that we normally get in camera with the flash, but we're trying to kind of recreate this effect. So we're sandwiching the profile, the main profile image, in between effects.
Are you spry? Let me fix you some sandwiches.
So it looks more natural and more realistic. So that's what we're doing. We're kind of sandwiching the effects so it's multi-layered. So we're going to go in, and this is kind of what it looks like. I'm going to delete this. This is what it'll look like when you drag that above, okay? And we're just concerned about this edge. We want this edge to be kind of blurry and get that effect. So I'm just going to create a layer mask. You just push down here, creates a layer mask, okay? And then I'm going to brush in and remove everything except for that edge. And then I'm going to set it to overlay, and that's going to give us the color we want. I'm going to duplicate that again, and we're going to change it to color dodge. Okay, from overlay to color dodge. That's going to add a little bit more lighting effects there. So you can see before and after. It's just real subtle, just adds more contrast and lighting. And the same layer mask. Okay, and then we're going to adjust the vibrance. So we add another vibrance adjustment here. And the way Eliza Vita does it, she desaturates her images and then she colorizes them afterwards. So I'm desaturating this with a vibrance layer. The vibrance is set up here to -75, so almost black and white. Okay, and then I went in and just scratched in some areas. This layer mask here, just scratched in some areas, brushed it in. Well, maybe like the opacity was set at 50. Just brush it in. 50, so push 5. You can see how it's changing it just little by little. Okay, so that's that layer mask. So this is an example of where I use that motion blur technique. So I had the shutter speed set to a slower speed. I popped the flash and then I moved the camera, but it created a cool ghosting effect. You can see her face is in the shadow here, right here, her eye, and then she's kind of like a ghost. And you can see the papers down here, all ghosted in. So it's a cool effect, and we're trying to recreate that with Photoshop rather than in camera, so it's a little tougher. So, but we can pull it off. So that's step 3. That's done. Now we want to get into the juicy toning, and that's going to change the image a lot. First up, we're adding a curves layer adjustment. Curves is up here, right here. Just push that, and we're going to go in and see what we changed. Mainly, I just added a little slight S curve in the main RGB. The red's not changed, green's not changed, and then the blue is not changed. So that's just a real slight contrast adjustment. You can see it here. See the contrast is just a little bit more. Alright, so this next one, you add another curves adjustment layer right up here. We're going to go in and see what happens here, but this one's adding more blue. So the RGB is pulled down in the center. You can see how it's darkening it a little bit there. Okay, the reds, not much has changed in the reds. Probably don't have to worry about that. Green's not changed, but the blues, you can see how the blues are taken up in the mid-tone, in the mid-levels here. See how her skin is turning blue. So you just raise that up a little bit from the neutral line, the center line there. So that's that one. And then you're going to add a gradient map layer right here. Gradient map right here. This is the gradient map. Add that. Okay, nothing fancy about this. It's just a regular black to white gradient. But you double click this, double click the layer, and you're going to go in here under blending options. You don't even have to click on anything else. But you're going to go on this top current layer, it says, and you're going to change this. Usually it's right here. Okay, usually it's like this. But you hold Option or Alt, and you're going to slide half of it all the way over. Okay, and that's going to create a certain effect. Let's see if you can see it. It's going to protect the whites from this effect. That's what it's doing. So you just slide it all the way over. It's real subtle, but you can see what it's doing there. And we add another one. Let's see if this one's adjusted. Yeah, this one's not adjusted that way. So if we just got a regular black to white, okay, the gradient's just normal black to white. There's nothing fancy about it. This is a layer mask, and it's got all these spots on it. So I'm going to show you how to do that. This is with a brush tool, and I'm going to just use a normal brush. Push B, or you just select it over here, okay, and then you go to your brush selection tools over here, however it's set up on your computer. And you're going to want to turn on scattering, and you can see the effect down on the bottom here. Let me select this, scattering, click on scatter, and you're going to turn up the scattering, and then the count, probably low count, and then the jitter. You're going to also use wet edges, turn on wet edges if it's not on there already, and that's going to create this kind of like a wet look. See how it's darker on the outside? That's going to create that wet look. What it looks like when you scatter it, you're just going to increase the size. I'm going to make the opacity 100, the flow probably 50, and then the brush soft. So you go in here, you select your mask, and then you brush in certain areas. And what we were doing is trying to get the face, kind of this face area brushed in. You can see the effect there. So it's brushing in, this is what it's doing. It's brushing in like that. Kind of a cool effect. So we're just kind of like adding layers and textures to it. So that's done. I'm gonna undo all that and then keep the original. I forgot to tell you this first gradient layer, this is the normal, but you set it to luminosity. So go into the layer modes and you're gonna scroll all the way down to luminosity. And this one is the same as well. Go to luminosity. Make sure those are both set at luminosity, okay? I forgot to tell you that. So this is just a white layer. Okay, so create a new layer right here with a plus sign, and just, you can push D for default color. Say this is green and whatever, another color. And this is blue. Say you want this default color, so just push D, and it's gonna make them black and white. So now to fill this layer, you just push Command Delete or Control Delete, and it's gonna fill it. And then what we're gonna do is put it on screen. Make the opacity 10. So V, we'll select this and then push 10. And then we're going to double click and we're gonna take this underlying layer and we're gonna protect the whites. So we're gonna slide it down. Remember, the way you do that is just hold Option or Alt and you click the middle and you're gonna slide it down. Okay, Option or Alt, it's gonna split this and then you slide it all the way down. Okay, so that's good. Then we go in and add more blues. See the blue changes here? So that's another curves adjustment layer. So click the curves adjustment layer. We'll see what the changes are. RGB is not changed. The reds, we add a little kink in the middle here. So we're going up above the neutral and then down below. And then we're going up again. So the middle, see how it's getting greener and then redder. So we're making this mid-tone just a little bit more green. The green is not changed, and then the blue is cranked up on the darks here. So just take this bottom left corner and crank it up so that gives more blues in the darks. That one's done. And then also this one is protecting the whites a little bit. So double click that right here on the right side. If it asks you to change the name, that means you're not clicking far enough to the right. Okay, so changing the name or changing the layer style. So you're gonna want to, it's normally down here like this, normal black on the left, white on the right, but you're gonna want to split this just a little bit, protect the darks and then protect the lights just a little bit. It's gonna crunch a little bit differently. Okay, and then we're gonna add an orange layer. This is just a new layer with orange in it. Just create like an orangish yellow, and then we hold Option or Alt and push Delete. And then we create, let's see, this one's protecting the blacks. So we're gonna go in here and split this one up towards that. You can see the effect it's creating. So we're protecting the blacks. That means the orange is gonna be primarily in the white areas. And then we've got this layer mask here. Same kind of effect without the wet edges. And we'll do that. Just add a layer mask. Okay, and then go into your brush properties again. Okay, and then turn off the wet edges. It's still scattering, so that's good. And we're gonna go in and just create this kind of effect. So we've got kind of like scattered blue, scattered orange. Okay, and that's the effect we're creating. My flow is at 50, so set your flow at 100. That way we get the black like this. So let's go back in. There we go. And you can resize this. See how the black's coming in now. Just get different effects. We're creating multi-layer texturing here. So I'm going to delete this because we don't need it. This is the original. Okay, so the step 4 of toning is done. And now comes the fun part. We get to add the lighting effects. So first thing, we want images that have the lighting effects. So I showed you these before, but I selected probably the camera raw ones, and I used, let's see, this one with all these swirls in it. And then I also used this one. These lights around him is pretty cool. I like how this shadow looks too, but this is the lighting effect we're going to use also. So select those if you want, but you can select different ones with different lighting effects, okay? But that's the one we used, and I'll show you. This is what it looks like, and I'm going to kind of attempt to shrink this. Okay, so this is what it looks like normally. And what I did, I turned it like you saw. I enlarged it. Just click this link button up here and you can enlarge it this way. So edit, free transform is Command or Control T. So I'm going to zoom out and then shrink it. You can see how big it was. That's how big I enlarged it. So to flip it horizontally or vertically, you can right click and choose flip horizontal or vertical. You can just rotate it around until you get what you want, okay, for your specific image or the image we're working on. Okay, so that's what I did there. All right, so we're back here, and this is the lighting effects that I chose. You want to kind of pay attention to using dynamic symmetry and composition techniques and all that stuff. You don't want anything crazy blocking her face or look like it's coming out of her nose. You don't want to create unwanted illusions. So with this particular image, see, you can see this diagonal in the background right here. See this diagonal created? So I wanted to use dynamic symmetry to try and align this or parallel it to the grid. This image is actually resized or cropped to the phi ratio. It's the full resolution, but it's just cropped to the phi ratio, which means it's a little bit skinnier from top to bottom. Okay, so this is included in the download. It's in this file right here. That's the phi grid, and it's got the major area divisions. But basically what I'm trying to do, you don't need to know anything about dynamic symmetry, just try and lock things into the grid or parallel them to the diagonals. So that's what I'm doing with this background image. So I'm paralleling this diagonal in the background to this major diagonal here. Okay, that's what I'm doing there. That's all I'm doing. That'll come into play a little bit later too. Also have the model lined up, see where this polar point is, where the major diagonals intersect. Her eyes right there. So I'm going to turn this off and continue going through the lighting effects. So this I thought was too much on her face. I wanted more of her face, the true color of her face coming out. So what I did was I darkened the image, so I added a brightness contrast adjustment layer, and you can see I reduced the brightness quite a bit, 96%. You can see what it does when I raise it up, see how it's changing it. So I just wanted this, overlay image just darker so I can see her face a little bit better. Plus I used a layer mask to mask some of it out, okay? You can do that. And then I used the hue saturation adjustment layer right here. We'll see what changes I made. So I changed the hue to -49. You can see the difference it makes, just adds a little bit more blue. And then the saturation was desaturated about 32, okay, -32. These are black and white lighting effects. It's from the same exact image, but I just rotated it and flipped it around, so it created these spiraling effects right here. See these swirling effects? So I just made that kind of like it's coming out of her head. See how this coincides? It's a coincidence. This imaginary line following this Baroque diagonal coincides, these loops coincide with her chin here, kind of like these are emanating, coming out of her head. Kind of a cool effect. Anyway, so I did that and I desaturated. Just to desaturate an image, just use Command or Control, Shift, and then U, and it'll desaturate it. Or you can use a hue saturation and just dial the saturation all the way down. But I also changed the layer mode to lighten. Okay, you can see the difference it makes with that black and white image. You can choose whatever you want. I just chose lighten. And that gets rid of most of the blacks and shows the lights instead. So I created this cyan layer with a difference layer mode. So it's going to actually flip the colors that are painted on here. So I'll show you what that looks like normally. Normal, and then go to opacity 100. So that's what it normally looks like. Then we're going to go down here and go to difference, and you'll see how it kind of inverts that color a little bit. Whatever color's underneath, it's going to flip it and invert it, and so we've got mostly reds under there, like right here, red colors, red tones, and it's going to flip it to green. So green's the complementary color of red, but we're going to reduce this for now. Opacity of 20%, so it's just kind of subtle. That'll give us some subtle greens, and then we're going to go and add some more later. Okay, and these are the resources that I showed you for lighting effects. Okay, so that's the first lighting effects. That's step 5. Now we'll do step 6. This is the second lighting effects. Okay, and this is going to add more greens to it. What we're basically trying to do is color harmonize. So if you look at the scene, and I teach this on the site, but color harmony comes usually with a hierarchy of colors, and that's 4 colors, which are hue variations of red, blue, green, and yellow. Okay, so right now we've got a ton of blue, we've got a lot of red, we don't have much yellow showing, and we don't have much green. Okay, so we want to add a hierarchy so we can just add more color harmony to it. So I added yellows. This is just a yellow layer, okay, toned yellow. I'll show you the normal. Okay, that's what the color is. And then I set it to multiply, and then the opacity is about 50. And what this is going to do, the more highlights, the more brightness and layers and everything we're adding to this portrait, it's blowing out these textures here. So one way to accommodate for that, so you don't have blown out lights and it doesn't look good, is just add a color layer here, and then you set it to multiply, and then you can change the opacity to fit your needs, you know, but at least nothing's blown out looking. It's actual color, and it's adding to the image instead of just having a solid white color on the edge, which is usually not good. It's called edge flicker, and we'll go over that in the last step. So we've got the yellow there, it's set to multiply, and the opacity is 50. This is the second image I used, and it's set to color. It's aligned to the grid, and let's see what it looks like normally. Normal 90, it's set at 90. So this is probably just part of one of the images I showed you, but I cropped it so I can't really tell, but it's one of those two images I included. And I rotated it so it's locking into this grid here, or paralleling it. See, so this is the grid, and then this is the image with the lighting effects that I wanted. But you can see this diagonal here, that's what I was looking for. Okay. And then I've got another diagonal here, so both of those diagonals are adding nice 90-degree angles and geometry to the image, kind of underneath the surface. So it's kind of a nice little look there. And this, I forget what I set at. Oh, it was set at color. So it's just showing the color of it, adding a little more color. Okay, so that's done. And then I also added this. These are wet brush marks, soft brush marks like we did last time. Okay, so I added that layer mask, pretty easy. You can do that on your own now, I'm pretty sure. This I added some cyan, but I set it to difference again. And then the opacity is at 70. I just painted on there. This is what it looks like normally. Just painted on some type of design, and it's at the same diagonal as that major diagonal going from the top left to the bottom right. See how this edge is diagonal, and then this edge, okay? So we've got gamut, that's repeating diagonals in the composition. So these are all hidden composition techniques that we can use. All right, so we got that. I blurred it a little bit, and then I set the layer mode to difference to add more green, and then the opacity to 70. This is another image that I showed you I used. This one I'm extracting the green only. So what I did there is I just used select color range, and then I selected this. You can push the plus button here and select all the greens and like the whites here, kind of that area. You can soften it, you can adjust the layer mask if you want. Say like we want to feather it by 3 pixels so it's a little softer. You can do that. You can expand it or contract it so it's more or less within this selected area. And then just push Command or Control J, and it's going to duplicate that. And then we've got this starburst shape that we can move around how we want. So this is what I used in the final image right here. And I have the layer mode set to overlay. You can see it normally is like that, but I set it to overlay. Adds more green, which we want. We're creating that hierarchy still. That's what this step is for. We're creating that color hierarchy. And then I added this layer mask here just to mask out just a little bit. You can see what this changes. So you can see I was just softening that hard edge. There was a hard edge at the top, so I just softened that a little bit. Okay, so that's that one. Just position it how you want. But I positioned it here, and probably, let's see, put on the grid. You can see how I positioned it with this vertical in mind, and then the diagonals. See how the diagonals are coming around? So you can rotate it how you want and position it how you want, just to enhance the color harmony and the geometry of the scene. Then I also duplicated it and added this other one. Let me get rid of this here. Okay, so I wanted more green. We've got a lot of reds, a lot of blues, and then we've got minimal green still, and we've got a little bit of yellow. So yellow is going to be like the smallest amount, then green, then probably blue, then red, okay? So that's our hierarchy. So we want a little bit more green. And this is just not scientific, it's just going by eye, whatever's more or less. So I added more green, and then I rotated this. It's on overlay mode still, and I just rotated it to line up to her nose, and then kind of like it's coming from her mind in little ways, but it's also coinciding with this diagonal in her hair. Okay, so this next layer, I duplicated all the layers, so I just selected this most recent layer, hold Shift, Option or Alt, Command or Control, and then E, and it's going to merge all those layers like we did last time, okay? And then I just pushed Command or Control I, and that's going to invert it. Then what I did was I lowered this. I'm going to protect the lights a little bit. Lower that. You can see the effects it's doing right there. It's adding more greens, but that'll change. So then I lowered the opacity, and I lowered it until it was something like this, kind of more hazy. What we're doing here is just controlling the contrast, so we want most of the contrast on her face here instead of all over the place. Right now it's a lot of contrast everywhere, so we're controlling the contrast. So I just inverted that and lowered the opacity, so it's kind of just like a mask, and we can control the contrast. So I'm going to go in here in the brush tool, push B, and you can select your brushes. So you can choose any brush. Probably you're going to take it off scatter. So you take this, and what I did was I used a specific brush. I can't find it now, but it was a brush kind of like, looked like a paintbrush. What I did was I used the layer mask and I brushed inside of it some black, and you're going to want to kind of just control where that contrast is. And I'm going to try and just recreate this look over here. And you can see the original is just like a medium gray. It's not all the way black like I'm doing now. So to change that, I'm going to fill this with white again and change the opacity to, we'll do the flow at 100 and opacity at about 50. I'm just going to brush this in. The more passes you go over it, the darker it's going to get. You can see it's gray there. So I'm just going to try and increase the contrast like that one brush. Just have it on the face here. Reduce the size here a little bit. Brush around. Computer's stalling a little bit. Yeah, increase the contrast where the face is. Okay, that's what we're trying to do here. You can see I'm recording video, I'm charging my computer, and I'm using Photoshop, so it's all kind of just slowing down, but we'll keep chugging along. That's what the layer mask looks like. Let's go to the next one. This is going to increase the contrast as well. And this is just a brightness and contrast adjustment. So I'm increasing the contrast by 88, and I've got the layer mode normal, opacity is normal, but I added this layer mask right there. And it's increasing the contrast just where her face is, okay? That's the most important part right here. So we're increasing the contrast. And then this one is another contrast change. Go up here, we increase the contrast again at 86%. And then this one is actually created with some masks I'm going to show you, some stencils. So these are all included within the Photoshop, and I included it in the downloads, but these are just, show you what these look like. They're just textures that you can use for layer masks or adding different textures to whatever you want. So to use these, you just hold Control or Command over this image here, and then you click on it, and it's going to select that texture. Let me deselect this. This is what it looks like, okay? I'm going to redo it. So this layer is, the contrast increased by 86%, okay, but the layer mask is black. You can invert that with Command I, or you can just fill it with black. And then we're going to paint inside this with these textures selected. That way we can just reduce the contrast where this selection is. So I'm selecting that. I'm holding Control or Command, and I'm clicking on that grunge texture spread out. And then I'm going to click back on this contrast layer, the layer mask, and I'm going to paint white in where that is, okay? And we'll see what we get. So deselect, and you can see the subtle change it did in the face. We're just going to keep doing that. So right click on that one, and go back to the mask, and then paint in with some white. See the change on that one. So add more contrast there. See, so slowly building up the textures. This one again is the same one, but I turned it to go across her eyes because I want her eyes to be fully in contrast. So I'm just gonna highlight this. I'm gonna click on that and then select those, turn it off, and then go back down here to the layer mask and paint with white. And then now we've got her eyes fixed, okay? That's what we've got so far. Okay, so we've got enough contrast. So we can close that, and that's all the lighting effects we need. So that's step 6 is done. Now we're just adding film grain. Okay, this is pretty easy. Just add a black layer. I'll do this to show you. Just add a new layer. Push D for default colors, and then Option or Alt Delete, and it's going to fill it with black. And you go up here and you add some noise. Add noise, and I've got it at about 24. Okay, you don't want a lot of noise because that's going to add more white. So I just want just a little bit of noise. But you're going to go in and you're going to increase the size. So Command or Control T, increase the size to maybe like 200%. Just type it up here, 200. Okay, click OK, and then we're going to blur it We want it a little bit blurry, maybe like, so it's soft, like maybe skin texture. Okay, so not too harsh, and that looks good. That's at 3.5. The original I blurred at 2.5. Okay, so this is the original, and then I set it to color dodge, and the opacity is about 60. And then I added another one. I just duplicated this one and rotated it around a little bit, and to give it more variety. Added some levels right here. This is a levels layer adjustment. So I just crunched all the darks and lights together on this left side, so it enhances the lights here, see? And then V. So right by your mouth, what it's doing is just crunching those so it shows up a little bit more, and it's light. The film grain's light. That's what I did with that second layer. So, and then I did a clipping mask. So I just hold Option or Alt and hover in between these two layers, and then I use that clipping. So it just affects this lower layer of the film, not the layers below it. Okay, so that one's done. That's the film grain. That's step 7. And now step 8, we're just gonna kind of refine it. We're gonna look at the edges. We're gonna make sure we add maybe like a nice vignette around there. So I just added some black around the edges. Use the brush tool and you can paint around the edge. Just create a new layer, and then make sure the scattering is not on. You don't want scattering. So then I just painted this, hold shift and paint around the edges. You can do vignettes so many different ways, but this is just a quick way. And you can just, if you think there's too much light in this area or down there, you can just paint in there. Okay, and then I go to multiply. I'm gonna blur it, Gaussian blur, probably a lot, just make it nice and soft. That looks good. It's 120. Then reduce the opacity to about 20, so it's just real subtle. It's not choking out the life of the image. You could even go 15 maybe, 15 opacity. You just type in the number of what you want. 5 is 50, 6 is 60, so maybe 10. That's real subtle. The original, I just went for 20 and just, it's nice and blurred and subtle. Another area you want to look at is the edges, and you want to make sure there's no high contrast around the edge. That's considered edge flicker. So right down here, this green's kind of gaining some attention. It's a lot brighter than down here because it's right on the edge. So usually what I do is just reduce the contrast there, and a way to do that is just create a new layer. Use your stamp tool over here, the stamp tool, clone stamp, and then I sample here, Option or Alt, click here, and then you can just go down here and make sure your opacity of the brush is at 50%, and it's just gonna subtly blend that out. Make sure you don't run over the edges, but it's just gonna subtly blend that out. Not erasing it, it's just reducing that contrast a little bit. That's all I did. So that's the edge flicker. That's step 8, and it's all controlled now. All right, so the next step is gonna be selective saturation, but before we do that, I realized that I forgot to click on some layers. That background blurring layer that we had, I forgot to click on that when I was doing the lighting effect. So let's scroll back down here. If you're using the file that you downloaded, just go down to this step 3 folder and just make sure all the correct layers are turned on. So it's going to be all of them in that folder except for the blur then radial. It says blur then radial blur. Turn that off. Okay, this is on off. Turn it off, and then turn off main face. Okay, this is main face right here. Turn that off because all the milk droplets, I forgot to turn those on too. But so this is just a small correction. Sorry about that, you guys. Go back down to step 3 and make sure these layers are turned off, the main face, and then the blur then radial blur, and then you should be all set. So this is what it's supposed to look like up to this stage. So let's go back up here, and we're gonna add some selective saturation just to make it look super cyberpunky, and we're gonna accentuate certain areas of this photo to draw in the eyes even more by adding more saturation. So usually when you're looking at an image that's got more grays, your eyes are more drawn to the areas that have more color in them. So the way we do that is we're going to add a hue saturation layer adjustment. It's right up here. Okay, and I'm going to show you what I adjusted on this. I just increased the saturation by 23, and then if we go back down here, we'll look at the mask that I created. This is the same exact mask that I used in the other step. I think it's step 6, and it's controlling the contrast right here. This is the layer, same exact layer mask. Okay, I'm going to show you how to use that same exact layer mask if you don't want to create another one with these stencils. So I'm going to make this saturation. I'm going to convert this just back to normal, white. So normally it's white. If we press this, we'll see that it comes in white, okay? So I'm gonna show you how to drag and drop this into this mask. So just click on this mask right here. It's the contrast mask right here in step 6. Okay, click on that and then hold Option or Alt, and then you're gonna drag it up and drop it into that mask. And now you have the same exact mask right here. Cool, huh? So that's quick and easy, and it's accentuating, it's creating saturation just in these spots, the same exact spot where we're creating more contrast. So that'll be a nice little way to add even more contrast and color in those areas, okay? So the next step is gazing direction, and usually when we're reading a composition or a book or whatever, we read left to right, most of us, okay? We'll read from this side to this side, okay? That's usually how we read, and we read from top to bottom. Compositions sometimes we'll read from bottom to top, like certain master paintings or whatever, because that's usually where the foreground is, and then with perspective it pushes things up into the frame, okay? But with this photo, we're reading top to bottom, left to right. We always kind of consider the gazing direction of the model. So she's looking this way. So if she's on this side of the composition, if you split this down the vertical center line and she's on this side of the composition, we need to have interest on this side. Otherwise, we're going to have an imbalance from left to right. So it's considered a counterpart, adding interest on this left side here. And we have interest. We have this green starburst. We have these swirls here. We've got nice interest going on. But we also want to consider the way we read left to right. So if we have all the interest on this right side here, we need something pulling our interest back to this so we don't get trapped on this right side, okay? So one way to test that and one way to see if we get more movement is by flipping it. So just push Command Option Shift E or Control Alt Shift E, and you're going to merge those layers together, and then we can push Command or Control T and then flip it horizontally. Just right click and then push flip horizontal and confirm that. So you'll see we get more movement actually. So she's gazing from left to right, and then these little swirls right here, we have a little more movement because of the way we read left to right, okay? We're getting more dynamic movement this way, especially with that broke diagonal down here too. Okay, so we're getting more movement. So that flip is actually working to benefit our composition. So that's step 10, and that's basically all that we have to look at, but I'm going to show you some bonus tips. Go in here, I've got this layer here, I just created a new layer, and I named it Pixel Peep Retouch. It's not going to be in the file that you downloaded, but just create a new layer by pushing the plus button down here, okay? Pretty easy. And then you can go in and retouch any areas that stand out and don't look right, okay? So you just pixel peep. So like this one right here, this is part of the milk that's splashing down. So the way I usually retouch is push S for the stamp tool right here, and then I reduce the opacity maybe by 50, maybe 20, and we're just going to reduce the contrast of any areas that are troublesome. So sample by clicking Option or Alt, click there, and it's going to sample the area that you clicked on, and you can just fade these areas out. You can see, I'll zoom in really close so you can see what I'm looking at, just this pixelated area right here. So I'm sampling this area, I'm going to just fade it out just a little bit, and maybe make it opacity 50%, and then we can get rid of this edge here. So this is just real nitpicky stuff. You can get rid of it, fine tune it. Just depends on how large. Like a lot of people just post on Instagram or whatever, social media, and no one's ever gonna look so close like this. But if you're printing large for like a billboard or another sign, you gotta consider things like this. And just look around, look for areas that annoy you or stand out. You want to make sure you don't have the edge flicker, but we already controlled that last time. So any areas, like if you don't like this spot, you can just edit it out. Push 0 for 100%. You can just edit that out. If you forgot to edit out a blemish on her face, you can edit that out. Usually I use the healing brush though for skin retouch. Just click J, that's the shortcut, and make sure it's on healing brush. And you can go in here and just retouch the skin if you need. So that's pixel peeping, just making sure everything's nice and clean. And then I'll show you one more thing we can do. If we go to the lighting effects, I told you I would show you how to use these. I took a lot of screenshots of these, the video. We could add one of those. I'll show you how to use that just like the other ones. You just add it in here. Just open it, drag it and drop. Just Command or Control T. We're gonna increase the size here. And we'll set it to, like, just depends. Lighten, screen, or overlay and soft light are going to be your best options, but lighten looks pretty cool. And you can double click, protect the lights here, protect the darks, just mess around with it. or you can just reduce the contrast. Just add a little more color in certain spots. You can flip it, rotate it. Okay, it's looking pretty cool. Getting some cool effects. Enlarge it. You can turn on the grid, drag the grid up here, and then you can rotate this so it's lining up to the grid. See how it's locking in that reciprocal here? So you can do that. You can rotate it so it's lining up on the Baroque diagonal and enlarge it. Just get all kinds of craziness going. Show you that. Turn this off. So we're getting all kinds of stuff. Okay, you don't have to lock in exactly. You can parallel it. If you just want a little added diagonals in there, some more repetition. Okay, another thing you can do with this is you can copy this same exact mask. Remember this mask? You can copy it up here. There's no mask on this, so you don't have to create a new one. You just do the same thing, Option or Alt, and you drag it up, and it's gonna drag that mask up there. So look at this cool little creation there. That looks kind of cool. But we can go a step further. We can flip this mask. Okay, we can unconnect it here, this little link. Just uncheck that. Just make sure that mask is clicked on, and then you're gonna go Command or Control T, and then right click, and then flip horizontally, and you can do that. You can make that mask. You can move that mask around however you want because it's unlinked. Just make sure if you move this layer, you relink it. That way the mask moves with it. Okay, you can do this. You can make sure that mask is selected and just push Command or Control I, and you can inverse it. That way we get our lighting effects back, and then you can move it around again. Just make sure it's unlinked. You can rotate it to match the dynamic symmetry, and then you can say if you want to invert it again, you get some cool little color effects. Okay, you can even select this layer right here, the main image, zoom out, Command or Control T, and you can rotate this. Look at that, that's cool. You can zoom in and just rotate it up here, the angle, and hold Shift so it rotates quicker. You can rotate it that way. Just make sure that mask is unconnected with that link right here. You're free to rotate it whenever you want. So we'll run with that. We'll just keep that for now. And then I showed you some more lighting effects in right here. I'm in the camera raw, and then this is image 0996. So just open that up. I usually just push auto and then I fine tune the adjustments. So go down here to optics. Sometimes you can just remove chromatic aberration and then use the camera corrections, the profile corrections. So it'll say which lens I used. I used the wide angle lens right here. And then open that. Gonna drag and drop it in here. Okay, we've got it. So I've got it up here already. And then I set it to lighten. You remember, lighten, screen, overlay, or soft light are gonna be your best options for the lighting effects. Sometimes color dodge, but that's adding a lot of brightness to it. So we'll go with lighten. Okay, and then we're gonna rotate it. And we're gonna try and line it up to her face like she's a cyborg or something. Kind of like that. So I'm matching it to the edge of her jawline here, all these lights. Confirm that. The only problem is she's got a light mustache now, so we can just edit that out. So just use that clone stamp tool. And you can put it on current layer so you're not editing her face. Then you can just edit the lighting out. Right, there you go. So that's completed. Now we've got a pretty cool looking, image, just with some techniques that we already learned. So that's basically it. We'll show you what it looks like before and after. Gets a little crazier, kind of cooler, but you can go as far as you want. I'm just showing you these techniques, and I hope you have fun with it. Leave a comment down below if you want to see more of this kind of stuff, and I'll be happy to help you out. But I'll talk to you guys later. Thank you.